we can talk about, we can definitely have that be the bonus subject for tonight. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. It looks like the pace has slowed down, and so we're going to get started. But thank you so much for joining us for this latest installment of the RadTech S.T.O.P speaker series. This is a monthly set of conversations where we look at the different ways that technology is, redefining our country and reshaping our lives. My name's Albert Fox Cahn. I'm the executive director of S.T.O.P, and really excited to be joined this month by Professor Chris Gilliard, who has an amazing array of titles and honorifics. And Chris, please tell me if I miss out on any of them. So among other things, Chris is a professor of English at Macomb Community College. He is a visiting research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Shorenstein Center. He's a member of the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry Scholars Council, and he's a member of our community advisory board here at S.T.O.P. So, and Chris, anything that I left out?
No, that covers it.
Well, really excited to have you here for a conversation on what I guess we'll call remote proctoring. Because, like, one of the things I want to ask you just off the bat, what should we call these systems, right? We can call them academic spyware, we can call them remote proctoring, we can call them, dystopian ed tech. Like, what do you have a favorite term of art?
Yeah, I mean, all of those. I tend to want to not accept the framing that the companies give us. I just call it, like, you could just call it surveillance software. You could use the Canadian term and call it invigilation. I think that's how you.
Wait, what is this term?
Invigilation? It's like
Invigilation.
I did not know the word either, to be honest. But it's
well,
the Canadian term for remote proctoring.
Well, I will hand it to the Canadians. That is like the best term I've heard yet. So when we talk about invigilation, like I know there are a lot of different questions that you flagged for tonight, but just to help people understand, what sort of technology are we talking about?
So there's a variety of things, but the under sort of the umbrella that technologies that where the claim is that they're going to cut down on student cheating, quotation marks. So that could be facial recognition, facial detection, room scan, eye scan, browser lockdowns, AI, again, quotation marks, AI proctoring or proctoring by individuals, actual human beings that are from a remote location.
And so it's obviously, when you're talking about this many different types of software, this many different ways that people are being monitored, there's a lot of issues that come up. So before we talk about the ways that these are supposedly solving a problem, let's just go into the question: do we actually need this technology? Right?
I mean, my strong assertion is no. I don't think we do. I think that primarily the technology is based on some pretty faulty pedagogical assumptions, and ones I certainly don't share, and to a large degree that have been discredited, or at least there have been multiple and long-standing discussions about how to do things better. So no, I mean, short answer, no, I don't think we need them.
So, like, everyone has changed the way that they're learning during the pandemic. It's upended education. So right now there's this, wave of tech companies coming out saying, oh my God, students are going to do terrible things if you don't invigilate them, or whatever the Canadians would say. Oh my gosh, you need to surveil them. But we don't actually know that there's a problem there that needs fixing, let alone that this is the right way to fix it.
Well, I mean, I've seen a lot of very questionable logic. I saw there was a recent student journalism piece where they basically just interviewed a bunch of professors and said, do you use remote proctoring? And one of the professors, and he was an econ professor, take that for what you will. said that he noticed a difference between the grades students were getting pre-pandemic and the grades students were getting during the pandemic. And his conclusion, right, like just with those two pieces of data, his conclusion was that students were cheating. Now, I'm not like that kind of doctor, right? I'm not a scientist, but there's all kinds of other variables that we should probably think about. Like, and again, like I don't start from the assumption that students are grifters or cheaters or people trying to get over. I think, as an attorney, you kind of would understand the problems with starting with the assumption that people are guilty of something and forcing them to prove that they aren't. And I think that this is especially bad when we do it with students. Yeah, I don't share the widespread claim, or at least the claim put forth by these companies and some instructors who believe in this stuff, that cheating is some widespread, that cheating is its own pandemic that we need to somehow fix. That's not
Yeah.
where I start from.
And it really is amazing how many universities are just taking on this assumption that any performance variance during a pandemic, during this really unprecedented time, is a result of cheating, which is not to say that cheating doesn't happen, but it's sort of this rush to assume the worst. And that to me is really troubling, because if you haven't proven that there's a necessity, it's hard to then go through an evidence-based analysis that this is the right way to solve that problem, because you don't know the scope of the problem you're trying to fix.
Right. And there's not a ton, I mean, there's a ton of research on how and why students subvert assignments.
Mm-hmm.
Most of what I've read, and I would argue that most of the research speaks to the reasons that don't fit popular narratives. So what I mean by that is students tend to cheat because they don't find the value in the work that's been assigned. It's not been properly explained. They have a degree of anxiety around the thing. They don't think it's worthwhile. Yeah, so that they don't think it's worthwhile. And so those are all things that can be addressed without surveillance. I mean, again, those are things that can be addressed with better pedagogy. So the segment of people, students who cheat, and again, I keep using that word, I don't favor it,
Mm-hmm.
but the segment of students who subvert assignments because they're interested in getting over is much smaller than I think most people think.
Yeah, and I really do think that it's important to remember that when you're talking about people, solving assignments outside the bounds expected by the professor, that can oftentimes speak to a design failure on the part of the professors and the programs. And I know I've used this line before, but when Kirk, cheated on the Kobayashi Maru, people said he was a genius. And I think I stand by that logic as being just as evidence-based as most of what we see with the remote academic spyware companies. So turning from the questionable premise that this problem is rampant and needs fixing, let's turn to the evidence that these systems are the right solution. What's the evidence that these systems actually work?
None. I mean, the spyware companies grading their own homework. I mean, again, like there's not independent research that supports the claim that these companies make that they somehow stop cheating or promote academic integrity or anything like that. As a scholar of surveillance, I mean, as well as I, that often surveillance sort of justifies itself. There's a belief that it works. There's an embedded belief that it works. And often, if it's shown to not work, then the justification or what's supplied next is, well, we need more surveillance, right? We need even more invasive practices. But there's not, um, there's no peer-reviewed evidence that would satisfy me that says these systems actually do what they say they do. I mean, again, if you go to the company's website, they will say that they do, but I mean, Facebook also says that their main thing is connecting people, right? Like, I don't believe that either. Um, and
Well, I
I
mean, they
think I
do.
find it. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say Facebook does do a good job of connecting conspiracy theorists and militia groups with like-minded folks, so they sometimes live
That
up
is
to it.
true. Yeah, true. And I find it really disappointing. I mean, kind of interesting, but really disappointing that educational institutions have been taken for a ride in this way.
Mhm.
That places that pride themselves often on being data driven or looking for evidence or kind of following what the research says, do none of these things when it comes to these systems.
I mean, that's such an important point. Let me just pause to invite those of you who are joining us on the Zoom call to, ask your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Really look forward to hearing what's top of mind for all of you throughout this conversation. But circling back to that point you just raised, why do you think it is that these institutions of higher education, many of which are research universities, are supposed to be the ones that are like pillars of the scientific method? Why are they just so readily latching on to the pseudoscientific rationale provided by these surveillance firms?
I mean, I have a couple theories. I mean, one is I think that the way institutions often envision students is foundationally problematic. And so what I mean by that is institutions, and I say this as someone who's been in these institutions for decades. Students are often viewed as uh, inherently dishonest, as grifters, and I am not in any way advocating that I believe this, but I do believe that institutionally across many institutions and classes of academic institutions, this is a prevailing belief. That students are looked at as inherently dishonest, that they need to be watched, they need to be surveilled, they need to be kept on a leash, so to speak.
Mm.
Uh, and I also think that institutions, like theory two, I think that institutions are looking for certainty where there is none. I think the pandemic highlighted a lot of these fault lines in ways that I think have become very clear, but that already existed in institutions. And one of the fault lines that institutions are looking for as they lose money and they lose state and federal financial support is certainty uh, in how they manage students. And again, the belief, and this is a belief that I think surveillance sort of justifies itself across many areas of our society in this way. There's a belief that if you can watch people enough, that you can produce some kind of certainty in outcomes and behavior. And again, I think that's faulty, but I think it gets at the root of why these institutions have so easily uh, bought into these narratives with very little, evidence.
And maybe this is too far afield, but in my mind, there seems to be this broader anxiety within the academy about the need to quantify students and to reduce them to these metrics. And we see some of this around the admissions process, where with more schools going SAT optional, ACT optional, there's suddenly this uncertainty about, well, how do we model which students will accept, and how do we model this and that? And there's this desire to sort of model every aspect of student activity and in a way that both seems to deprive students of agency, but also dehumanize them in some
Yeah,
ways.
absolutely. And I think too that there's a real, going back to something I said in the beginning, there's a real misunderstanding, and to my understanding, about what learning is
Mhm.
and what it means. And to the extent that institutions think that their job is to prepare students for life outside of college, these kinds of assessments are going about it all the wrong way. So if I had, if I needed legal counsel and I had a thorny issue, I would hope that the attorney reviewed like relevant case law before he talked to me, or before we went to court. Same if I had a doctor, for I sought out a doctor and I had a pressing issue, right? I would hope that that doctor would do research on it. When I'm going to do a talk, right? Or if I sat down to write something, or even before this event, right? I reviewed my notes. I read some things I wrote. Um, and I've got notes right here next to me as well, right? So like the way that people tend to operate in professional settings is not the way that we test them often. So if you believe that the goal of, yeah, and there's problems with this understanding, right? But if you believe that the goal of the institution is to um, somehow prepare students for a real world setting, these kinds of assessments don't do that. And so I think, I find it highly problematic.
Hey, why don't we talk a bit about some of the alternative approaches that are available? Because you're right. It's sort of like we bake in this assumption a lot of the time that, oh, we're going to use this test to judge someone's merit or someone's capacity to do this thing, but that the way we're testing bears no relationship to the way people would go about that activity in real life. And with like lawyers, a really powerful example is for the bar exam, you're tested on your proficiency as a lawyer by being asked to, off the top of your head, give multiple choice answers to random legal hypotheticals without any research, something which would get you disbarred if you were to attempt it in real
Yeah,
life.
yeah. And so I don't, yeah, I'm really, and there are, I mean, there are fields that actually do this work, right? Like you can get like advanced degrees in disciplines that think about and develop different ways to do assessment and to think about what teaching and learning means and how to develop different kinds of metrics. And so, and most colleges, I mean, even poorly resourced ones, have people have people in house who do this.
Mhm.
And so it's when last March, when people had like sort of a 10-day hiatus or something along those lines to hurriedly figure out what they were going to do. In some ways, I can understand turning to some of these systems. I mean, I again don't agree, but it makes a little bit more sense. But as we've gone on, and not only have people had more time to think about them, but the cases, you know, documented cases in various publications of the harms that are perpetuated by these systems, and the failure of many institutions to move away from these systems with this, with these factors, with these known factors in place, I think is reprehensible. Like it's really, I find it so troubling. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, we made a lot of exceptions for the emergency at the beginning of this pandemic, but those exceptions have increasingly become sort of the longer term pattern. But just on this question of pedagogy, still, what could you give a few examples of sort of an alternative method that you've seen or you've thought of as something that could be rolled out in these situations as an alternative?
I mean, there's, like you can have projects, right? You can have ways that people can apply the learning in a way that doesn't speak to kind of a multiple choice question. I mean, I teach writing, and one of the things I think is so important, a lesson that I continually learn about writing is how it's social. That I mean, you and I wrote a piece together, right? And so, just for people who are unfamiliar with it, with that process, like of collaboratively writing something, like you took a turn and I took a turn, you took a turn and I took a turn, and I would say like, hey, I'm not sure about this, and you would say like, hey, I think this piece really needs to be in there. And this is like how people work, right? Like the idea that so in as much as people do things socially or try to apply their knowledge in kind of new and interesting ways, creative ways, I think there are ways to, and again, this gets into some of this poses problems, right? So I can imagine someone hearing this and saying, well, I have 100 students, right? Or I have 300 students. And so there are some difficulties, and I think sort of some long tail questions about what classes are supposed to look like and how many students can someone reasonably be expected to um, uh, meaningfully engage with, all these things. What does it look like to grade some of these? But again, like what that leads to for me is also questions about what grading even means, which is like maybe too deep in the woods and for like pedagogy theory for like something like this. But I have some kind of deep-seated problems with how we think about grading um, overall. I mean, one of the justifications I've heard for these systems is that many places have, so let's say you have 30 students. Many places will say, okay, so your class can only have 5 A's and 10 B's, and the rest has to be below that. And instructors and professors get punished for not falling along that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the ideology built into what that means for teaching and learning and how students are set up to fail in a system like that, I think it underpins some of the problems that we're seeing where with things like remote proctoring. Like remote proctoring probably wouldn't exist if we didn't have some of these other things that prop up faulty understandings about what school is supposed to do and what learning is and things like that.
And I think that's so crucial right now when we see so many universities being pushed to the breaking point by the financial strain of the pandemic, is it's expanding the sort of gulf between really well-resourced elite institutions and less well-resourced institutions that, maybe were relying a lot on, tuition dollars, didn't have a huge endowment, and just sort of, one thing I've seen, and maybe this is an overgeneralization, is those more elite institutions tend to have less of a scarcity mindset with the grading. And so I'll just speak, I went to prep school where we had no grades. I went to a very elite law school where I basically had no grades. But, I've also went to, a college where there was some sort of curve. And it just really, it seems to reflect this idea that the higher up you are in the pecking order, the more you need to enforce these stratification mechanisms, both in how you have grading, but then how you enforce that grading through this, academic spyware.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I would love to, in someday in my free time, I'd love to, ha ha ha, I'd love to conduct a study, about like the difference between kind of elite institutions and others in who uses this kind of stuff. Because some of the most prestigious institutions in our country and in Canada either ban or very heavily discourage the use of proctoring software. So for instance, Stanford, Harvard, McGill, have policies against, again, that or either ban or strongly recommend against using these systems. And so I think there's something to, this is anecdotal, right? But my guess is that this would play out across many institutions.
And of course, this is the pattern we've seen with academic surveillance more broadly, right?
Hmm.
That like when what schools have metal detectors? It's overwhelmingly, lower income BIPOC schools. What schools have police officers stationed there? It's the same power dynamic being, perpetuated over and over again.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I really hope you get some free time, as skeptical as I am that you ever will, just because I would love to see that study. All right, we have our first audience question, and please do keep these coming throughout. Cade asks, what advice would you give students who are trying to push for this academic surveillance software to be banned at their universities?
So one of the things I would suggest is to reach out to some of the national organizations that are doing a bang up job on supporting students in this. Fight for the Future, EFF, ACLU in some cases. I would also suggest to talk to um, their colleagues, right? Talk to their classmates, because I think there's been, again, like I would speak to your expertise too, Albert. I mean, there's been like a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year gaslighting campaign by tech companies that say students don't care about privacy. Um, it was never true, but I think that the last couple years, right, even this past year specifically, has shown that there's tremendous care and concern by students about these issues, and we've seen a lot of the successful campaigns against it led by students. So that those are the two things I would say, is to reach out both to local and national organizations, but also to enlist their classmates, because there is a lot of negative sentiment around these things, and we've seen that students can have a significant effect.
Completely. I mean, I think the student organizing efforts has been amazing. I'm in awe of what the young lawyers and law school graduates have been doing to organize around the bar exam. And in terms of reaching out to organizations, yes, 100%. We've done a bit of this work at S.T.O.P, but EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, they have been really stellar in this area. I think we actually have Rory Muir from EFF in the audience, and I know that Rory has been a really important point person for EFF on this issue as well. So I think this is something where there is opportunity to really shift the discourse on campus and the policies a lot more effectively than things that have been entrenched for 5, 10, 15 years. I think that's one of the things that sort of, as dire as all of this technology is, when it's something that's newer and more malleable, I think that's something that's really exciting about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I do think that institutions in some ways are putting themselves at risk for legally. Um,
Oh yeah.
I'm not an expert, right, on that part of it, but I think the discriminatory aspects of these things, whether those be race based or based on disability, pose big problems for institutions. I'm not sure that many of these institutions are thinking about it that way, and I do think that's another lever that's important to pull whenever possible.
And I do want to mention the amazing work to start that litigation campaign, particularly in Illinois. We've seen students suing at Northwestern, I believe, to push back against some of these systems. And so I don't understand how any general counsels said that this was a good idea. Like, I think seriously, there are going to be lawyers losing their jobs for rubber stamping this stuff, because in a lot of states this is clearly something that is beyond the scope of what's permitted.
Yeah, I mean, one of the schools that stepped away from it, specifically in their letter about why they were doing it, cited the accessibility issues.
Mhm.
And that those issues run across the variety of these systems. Many of them have these same accessibility issues because of the like foundationally what they do.
And what I see that we have a bunch of questions coming in from the audience. Please keep them coming. But let's just pause on the accessibility point because I think this is counterintuitive for some people about the different ways that this type of technology can, create really just horrifying barriers for students with disabilities. Could you talk a bit about some of the research that's been done there?
Yeah, I mean, I would urge, I forgot the name of the panel we did last, about 10 days ago, but I would urge everyone to go listen to that. Primarily, I mean, especially the final panel discussion. Chancey Fleet was on there and did like a job that I really can't do in describing it. I'm gonna do my best, but you need to go listen to Chancey Fleet. Like, that's what you should do. But so I'll just recount some of the things that have been documented in the New York Times and Vice and Verge, in the Washington Post and the Chronicle, right, of things that students have had to endure when dealing with these systems. So for instance, many of the systems contain some kind of either face detection or facial recognition, and students have had to shine bright lights in their faces. They've had to look at, deal with systems and deal with, help desk saying that the system doesn't recognize my face, doesn't recognize me as, as a person. And, this is like really, I mean, I can't overstate this. This is dehumanizing, right? To have to call a help desk or contact a help desk when you're just trying to, take a test and say, your system doesn't think I'm a human being. Like, I can't, it's like so degrading. Like, I can't, even if I thought every student was cheating, this is not a thing I would subject them to. Students with disabilities. So for instance, if students have any kind of involuntary movements of their face or eyes or things like that, well, the systems may detect this, flag this as potentially cheating. And again, one of the things I feel compelled to say is that the people who make these systems say, well, we didn't say they were cheating, we just flagged them for potential cheating, right? And like, I'm not okay with this. Like, it's a really shoddy argument that tries to absolve them of responsibility for a system they design. It requires students often to sit still for several hours at a time, right? And many people are not able to do that. They may have issues where they need to get up and use the bathroom or get a snack or get water or, and I mean, the list is endless, and it shouldn't be, students shouldn't have to disclose these kinds of things in order to take a test. There are a lot of these systems have some kind of room scan. And again, like this is highly problematic when we're all working from home, or many of us are our homes have now become the site where we do everything all the time. And so again, there's a lot of there's a lot of forced disclosure in these systems. So you could see what people's rooms look like. There's all kinds of clues as to who a person is and what they do that you may not want to disclose, but that you're forced to disclose to a tech company because you're taking a test. Again, like this is, people might wonder why they're looking at my snowboarding picture. And this is a thing I do all the time to highlight this issue. Like, no one who's listening to this has a right to see into my house because I don't want you to. And I think everyone should have that choice. Like, I make that choice as a very privileged thing, but I think everyone should have that choice. And I don't think that we should, I think it's very disturbing that we've assumed that we have the right, because people want to learn, that we have the right to invade their homes in these kinds of ways. And so, I mean, the list is long, Um, and yeah, so I'm not sure that everybody sort of realized the extent to which these things um, exist. But again, even one of them, right? If I were only to say it's racist, or if I only said it's ableist, I for me that means it's a non-starter. I mean, for me that means, oh, we have to find a better way to do this thing. You know, and I mean, I do and I don't understand why this is not why institutions don't do this. But I think as much as we can, like wherever we are on that power spectrum, we have to force institutions to do this because that something is racist or that it's ableist. That it's, you know, I mean, I didn't even get into questions about people's broadband access, right? And the different kinds of computers people do and don't have, right? That it's classist. Any of those things is enough for us to say we have to find a better way to do it.
Completely. And that's what's so bizarre about this, right? Because there are things that are really tough calls in the surveillance debates, but this is one of those ones where it's just layer after layer after layer of harm and inequity and inefficacy. And so it just becomes, the more you look at it, the more you just pull your hair out, because it's like, why is anyone saying this is okay?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
all right. Well, let's turn to a couple more questions. So, Tim asks, how do you see academic surveillance technologies fitting into the broader context of workplace surveillance outside of education as well? Do you see these technologies expanding beyond education use for which they've been designed? Are there organizing lessons to be learned for workers in other industries?
I think this is a fantastic question. I mean, there's a maybe two or three part answer. I mean, one of the things I've consistently said is that I think that these are these systems are a sign of things to come in many ways, not only in academia but in the workplace writ large. So I think that instructors, professors, tend to think that in some regards that we are special and that the ways that workers are surveilled are not going to come down on us. And I am here to tell you that you are wrong. You are not special. It's happening right now and it's going to continue to happen. Um, and so if all of those other reasons for not adopting these systems or not supporting them or do not move you, then I would suggest to people to think about how much you'll like it when eye tracking and room scan are part of your everyday experience as an instructor. I mean, I believe that you will not like it very much. But I also think, you know, like just as just as surveillance by, software for students has skyrocketed, the use of it has skyrocketed during the pandemic, so has surveillance software for workers of all stripes, um, you know, white collar workers included, because there's a firm belief that, so like when you're in the workplace, there are unfortunately not a lot of hard rules about what employers can't. There's not a lot of hard rules for ways that say employers can't surveil you. And so what the pandemic has done is broken down some of those barriers between home and work, and it's allowed companies to peer into people's their workplaces, which are now their homes, in the same ways that they're allowed to do it when they were on site, so to speak. And so I think it's important for all of us to realize that, in as much as like we are workers or subject to power, a power dynamic where we're on the watched end of something, that these are systems we should probably resist. And again, I think like one of the difficulties with talking about surveillance to certain people is the prevailing belief by the powerful or the relatively powerful that the systems will not be turned on them. And again, like I can't convey enough, like although marginalized populations, vulnerable populations, um, are going to suffer sort of earlier and more often, that in many ways these systems are not going to be good for anybody except the most powerful. And so the last part of that question was about resistance. I think the student pushback has been instructive. In the workplace, overall, I think that's going to look a little bit different, because I don't know that workers necessarily, I mean, if you have a union, you can, but I don't know that otherwise, workers often have a lot of leverage in that. But I would love to see more pushes for regulation and legislation about what kinds of surveillance is and isn't allowable in the workplace as well.
And one of the things that's really, I couldn't agree more with all of that, but like, it's interesting that a lot of the blue collar workplace surveillance is much more brazen. So we saw earlier this week, Amazon rolled out its consent form consent for
Yeah,
biometric surveillance for its delivery workers, where they had to agree to have, their biometric data captured by all these cameras in the vehicle and all these ways that would be tracking them. But you have, potentially just as invasive systems that are running in the background of a lot of Microsoft products, tracking quote unquote productivity and tracking a lot of behavior. And, we've seen more and more access to webcams for people working remotely for, to monitor their behavior outside of physical offices. And so, yeah, I really do think that you're right. Like, the more we normalize it for any group, even if it starts with, less powerful groups of workers, I saw a talk this week about that's coming up about how to use artificial intelligence to screen applications for major law firms. This is something that, even, Ivy League law school graduates are going to have their fate determined to some degree by these systems.
yeah,
And it's really going to be something that I think infects nearly every aspect of the workplace if we don't push back now.
yeah. And I mean, I hate to, well, I don't hate to do this. I actually enjoy doing it. I hate that I'm right. Um, but the gloom and doom part of this is it just gets worse. Right? There is no point in which um, companies say like, "Oh, we've extracted enough." That doesn't happen. And so, I mean, like one of the things I suggested, I was talking to someone earlier this week about these systems. And so like, let's take like the room scan for example, that proctoring companies do. So somewhere in, the offices of one of these companies, someone's like looking at the data and saying, oh, we can probably tell by the amount of clutter in someone's room, like how likely they are to cheat. Okay. And again, like, don't tell me I'm giving them ideas, because my mind is not, the worst thing I can think of is something that they probably did yesterday, right? Like I can't, like if you told me that they weren't doing this, I would be absolutely shocked. And I mean, I speak with this kind of authority on that because for the last 6, 7, 10 years, all I've been doing is looking at like the terrible things that these companies do and the terrible things that they, terrible ways that they try to do them worse, right? Like, there's not a point where it gets better. It just gets kind of more extractive and more invasive. I mean, right, we already have companies that say that they can, based on monitoring your emails and your web browsing, that they can tell whether or not you're going to leave the company. We have companies that say that they can tell what kind of employee you would be based on an AI looking at your face during an interview. I mean, we have all these things. We already have all like terrible things. And so to the extent that we don't stop them, they're absolutely going to get worse.
And I feel like the way you're describing it, that's actually more intentional than the way a lot of these products are developed. Because I think a whole lot of the time they're just like, huh, we've got a lot of trading data. Let's see what sort of correlations the machine learning model extracts from
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
And so it's like, oh, the machine learning model, it came back and it seems to be saying that wearing a purple shirt correlates with, cheating. And like it sounds absurd, but like I feel like with the way these systems are designed, just through like cheap access to a whole lot of computing power, you end up with these just absurd cross correlations.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And
Um,
again, like I don't enjoy telling people that, but I do think that it's an important thing to note because um, the idea that so again, I reject these systems. I don't think we should do them to students. I don't think we should use them on incarcerated people. Like I don't think they should exist. But often people are not moved by arguments about how marginalized people should not be treated. And so part of the thing I've become, part of the thing I've started to do is say that you are actually next. And hope that if the other arguments don't move people, that this one will.
all right, that's the most depressing thing you get. I'm sorry. Like, I don't want to believe that's true, even as I simultaneously believe it probably is, because yeah, we all right, before I start, drinking on the Zoom call, let me go to our next question from our favorite of all the possible guests, anonymous. We always appreciate when people appear anonymously.
That's
Um,
right.
is the responsibility of biases, failures of in facial recognition technology, for example, in proctoring software, is that on the technology provider or the school that uses it, or both? So who should be responsible for the bias in this technology?
Uh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't usually approach things that way. I mean, I would say both. But again, like my stance on facial surveillance, facial recognition, is that it should not exist, right? That it should be widely banned. Um, and so, I mean, there's a student who's done some interesting digging into um, the facial recognition that's used by one of the companies. And I'm sorry to be mysterious, but I don't want to get sued, and I also don't want to give the student's name if they don't want me to give their name. But there's a student who's done some interesting digging into it and found that they've used um, uh, one of the more faulty facial recognition programs.
Mhm.
But again, like I hold the company starting from my assertion that it shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be part of like any system where you're deploying it against students. Like the company's at fault, but also the school is at fault. But again, like I don't want better surveillance. I want no surveillance. And so that, I think is a dynamic that often gets discussed when we talk about facial recognition, right? And so when the fact that a student has to shine a bright light in her face so that the system recognizes her as a human being is a failure of systems,
Mhm.
right? Not of a tech. And I think that's an important thing to remember. Like it shouldn't have ever gotten to that point. Um, like no one should have to endure that. So with all due respect to the person who asked the question, it's not like a way I would approach it.
Yeah, no, I completely get that. I mean, I always say that the alternative to biased facial recognition isn't better facial recognition, it's no facial recognition,
Yeah,
because when, solving one aspect of bias is just going to result in a system which perpetuates other forms of bias.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
And so, As far as not naming the companies, I completely appreciate your discretion. I can't wait to litigate with these firms personally. But that's just me. And I would add one thing that we've tried to push generally when it comes to the regulatory environment for artificial intelligence is this concept of joint and several liability, that everyone who has a hand in creating these bias systems should be fully on the hook for the harms that occur. And so, in my mind, you should have the university on the line. You should have the software company on the line. You should have everyone who's enabling these systems really subject to litigation, because one of my big fears is that you'll end up with this weird situation where no one ends up being fully responsible or fully liable for the harm that's caused.
Yeah, and I mean, these companies have done a really, their narrative is very strong around this, which is it essentially goes, we didn't say the student was a cheater. We just made a system that says you should look to see if that student is a cheater. And so they have all these ways of dissembling, built around the idea that they don't, that they don't want to take responsibility for the systems they built. And yeah, we should absolutely reject that.
Definitely. All right. Well, we have another question, and I think we'll have time for one or two after that. So please make sure to ask any other questions you have using the Q&A function. So again, from our friend Anonymous, how do you see student privacy advocacy changing as we hopefully return to in-person instruction?
Oh yeah. Oh, this is a great question. I mean, I see a lot more student-led initiatives, and I think that that's supremely important because it immediately gets rid of the claim that students don't care about it, that it's some paternalistic or, academic thing that, students aren't really worried about, you know. So I see that as a big thing moving forward, that many of these initiatives um, are going to be led by students. Um, and I think in that regard, I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to support them as much as possible. But I also think that, I think this year has opened up a lot of people's eyes. Um, and, I mean, every day I see more and more people, whether that's students, instructors, people outside of even, academic life talking to me or bringing these things up, right? I mean, there's campaigns, by different organizations. There's social media accounts about these systems. And so I do see kind of a more widespread um, and varied degree of resistance that we haven't had until now. I mean, I
Hmm.
think for a long time, some of these issues, like student privacy issues, were considered very niche, right? Like I've again, like been working at it for maybe about 10 years, and so many people so have, like I've always had to fight the claim that people don't care about this, or this is somehow like I don't, again, like don't like this term, but it's how people describe it, like a first world problem or something like that. I think people are waking up to some of the real harms um, that are again widely distributed, and so that's how I see the if I'm optimistic, that's how I look at the future.
And I think that takes us to the really important question of what happens next, right? With do you think that when we look at the sort of historical arc of higher education in the US, is this going to be a blip, or do you think this is the start of a new phase? Do you think that we can roll back this spyware next year as quickly as it was expanded last year?
Well, unfortunately, don't think we can. And one of the reasons is, yeah, I'm forgetting the proper term for this. But so these systems are expensive. In some cases, 80,000, 100,000, 300,000 to cover a school for 1 year. So when schools spend that kind of money, they have to justify spending that money, which means they have to keep using the system. Whether it works or not, whether it's harmful or not, none of that matters because they have to, in some way, explain why they just spent $300,000. And so it's going to take a while to chip away at them. I think it's something that can be done. I think it's, obviously, I think it's important work. It's going to take some time, but, kind of speaking to what we talked about throughout, these systems, they're a symptom of some larger problems that about how we see students. I mean, someone's been teaching for a super long time. I mean, one of the unfortunate things that I've recognized is that often if you're sitting at a table with a bunch of academics long enough, someone will start talking about cheating, students cheating. We got to change the way we think about students. That this is not helpful or useful way to think about students. I mean, it's really harmful. I mean, it's why we have plagiarism detectors and things like that in schools, and why they're built into certain systems. Again, it's the model of a student as someone who's trying to as inherently dishonest. And so we have to change that before we can really get rid of these systems. But I think we can also chip away at them moving forward.
Completely. As long as we view students as adversaries rather than partners in education, it's just going to lead more and more of these same sorts of abuses. Well, we're almost out of time. Chris, any final thoughts on this topic?
No, I mean, I just really enjoy this conversation and the opportunity to talk about this stuff. I know that a lot of people, I mean, it's probably seems very easy for me to say a lot of this stuff. And I face very little repercussions generally from this, other than people saying that I'm not very smart or don't want to know what I'm talking about. I will say though that everybody listening, that there are different ways that we can kind of exercise the power that we have in institutions, even to discourage people from using them or push the conversation into, a better, more thoughtful arena. So everybody can't just come out and say like these things suck and we shouldn't use them. But to whatever extent we can move away from a thing that is producing very real harms to students, like we should do that.
Well, on that note, I think that's a perfect note to end this conversation, but can't thank you enough for joining us. It really just so many layers to just the types of harms that are coming from these systems and the trajectory we see for them going forward. And thank you so much to everyone who tuned in this month. We'll be back with another discussion next month, and just continuing to look at the ways that these technologies are remaking our world. So thank you so much and stay safe.